This is the Essential Podcast from S&P Global. My name is Nathan Hunt. I'm sad to say that I was terrible at statistics. Not just garden variety terrible. I had to take a statistics course in college, and my grade in that course pulled down my entire grade point average. I passed because I had to, but the process involved more hours in the library and panicked sweat than I would have thought possible. For that reason, I'm rather proud of that C in statistics. It was a triumph of effort over ability. I am a fan of today's guest. That's rather strange since he's a statistician. In fact, he is an Emeritus Professor of Statistics at the University of Cambridge. His name is David Spiegelhalter. For several years, I've been watching videos of David's lectures and interviews on YouTube. In these videos, he talks about probability and statistics. That to be expected since David is a statistician. What's strange to me, at least, is that he explains statistics and probability in a way I can understand. Not only do I understand what he's saying, but I actually enjoy it. Enjoying statistics is not an expected outcome for me. David has written several lovely books, but is probably best known for The Art of Statistics. He has appeared on television many times to educate people about probability and has been knighted for his services to medical statistics. He has a new book out called The Art of Uncertainty: How to Navigate Chance, Ignorant Risk, and Luck, which is unfortunately not out until March in the US. It is coming from Norton, although I did snag a copy when I was last in London, so you'll have to consider today's interview a preview, and then you can pre-order the book on Amazon or from Norton Books. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much indeed.
David, books are difficult to write, so why did you write this book? What inspired you to do this?
Oh, mainly because Pelican gave me the chance to write it. Art of Statistics did very well. It sold very well, translated into 11 languages and something like that. And so they actually said, would you like to write another one? And I thought, yeah, I'll do this because it gives me a chance to actually talk about the stuff that I've been interested in for 50 years. And that's about probability, chance, risk, luck, ignorance, coincidences, surprises, and all that sort of stuff. And which has followed through all my work that I've been doing for years and years. But it's also been a personal interest of mine about what all this stuff actually means. You know, what does luck mean? What's probability mean? And so on. So it was a good opportunity to try to write in what I hope is a reasonably user-friendly way about everyday words and that are used without actually people ever really taking apart what they mean. And, it's full of stories and a little bit of maths. It has to be a little bit of maths, I think, but it's mainly, in small print at the bottom of the page or something. You don't really need it. So I hope it's not as off-putting as your course was. I feel sorry for you. I have so many people saying, "Oh, I hated statistics; was my worst subject." And I go sort of into counselling mode. I want to sit there with a box of tissues between us in a room and say, "Tell me about it. Tell me more about your experiences," because so many people have had such terrible experiences.
Let's talk about public perceptions of statistics. Do you feel that the public has grown to distrust statistics? And if so, why?
Well, like so much in public discourse nowadays, there seems to be increasing polarization. And I think COVID has got a lot to answer for, both for positives and negatives. So let's do the positives. During COVID, I did a huge amount of public explanation of all those numbers that we heard every day that were being bandied around with a colleague. We had a weekly column in the Observer, one of the main Sunday newspapers in the UK. For 50 weeks, we had a column on statistics of COVID. We wrote a book and so on. And, there was endless demand just to have the numbers explained. There's huge public interest in the statistics. There's a bigger acceptance of graphs, of, quite subtle ideas about false positives rates, about, the people had to understand that there was no such thing as, a COVID death. There are at least 4 different definitions being bandied around. And so it was challenging, and there was enormous interest and public demand. So that's the positive. On the negative side, of course, COVID also brought about a lot of, I think, false claims, a lot of misinformation based on inappropriate claims based on data, and some of that is inevitably continued. So I think in today's rather polarized society, data is up there as something that is part of that polarization.
I'm wondering if we can pull something from the current headlines to talk about with regard to COVID and statistics and probability and uncertainty. The president elect of the United States has declared that they intend to nominate Robert Kennedy Jr. to the position of head of the health department in the United States. Kennedy is famously doubtful about the efficacy or the safety of vaccines, and was prominent in opposing the COVID vaccines. How do you, as a statistician, look at the kinds of claims that were thrown around during COVID? How do you evaluate? Because everyone sort of seemed to have their own statistics. So, how did you evaluate different approaches to statistics during that time?
Yes, and we had our own, skeptics about COVID vaccines at the time, and I got engaged in some of those discussions. I felt quite in the middle because I was at one extreme. You had people saying, "Oh, vaccines are safe and effective. Everyone should get vaccinated. We should give them to kids," and real gung ho vaccine. And I completely disagreed with them. And then also the people saying, "Oh, vaccines are really dangerous. We shouldn't be taking these things," and I completely disagreed with them. So, same situation throughout COVID. I was there in the middle, generally being attacked by both sides, which was, an interesting experience. But I felt meant I was doing the right thing. And so, for example, the phrase that was used by vaccine enthusiasts, "vaccines are safe and effective," I think it's a really inappropriate phrase to use. I think it's misleading because vaccines are not completely safe and they're not completely effective. They're just safe enough and effective enough to give to some people in some circumstances. For example, in the UK, we never vaccinated children, and that was quite appropriate, I think. And so, as you got younger, in fact, the risks, certainly from the AstraZeneca vaccine, went up, which we showed, and we did the analysis to show that. Which is why, we were part of the discussion in 2021 when the AstraZeneca vaccine stopped being given to people under 40 because of the increased risk of these very rare side effects for the people who got the COVID vaccine. And also, I got fed up. I still get fed up with people saying, "Oh, well, you've got to compare the risks of the COVID vaccine with the risks of if you get COVID." I said, no, that's the wrong comparison to make, because that's not the choice you have between the vaccine and getting COVID. You have to also take into account the chance you will actually get COVID. So, for example, we don't have a smallpox vaccine because there's no smallpox around. So the amount of COVID circulating and how dangerous it is, obviously is very important indeed. And so we actually did the analysis and the public presentation when the discussion was going on about vaccine safety in the UK to show the benefits and harms and how they're dependent on different ages, and how actually if you're a young person, it definitely the benefits, which only, of course, kick in if you do get COVID, and the harms were roughly balanced. So you certainly shouldn't have the vaccine. But for older people like me, well, it's a huge imbalance. The benefits usually outweigh the harms. So yeah, give it to me. So I felt the vaccine discussion was terribly, it forced one side and the other. On the other side, the sort of things people saying, "Oh, this vaccine is causing huge amounts of harm and people shouldn't have it," is I think was completely wrong. Vast numbers of lives were saved because of the vaccines.
This is actually something that I picked up over and over again in the book, which is you seem to want to thread the needle between a false certainty and a false uncertainty. How do you approach that? How do you, in your own work, approach differentiating those two areas?
Yeah, that's a good point because I both, I have an equal argument against complete certainty to people who just say, oh, we just don't know. I think they're both nonsensical positions to take. And so that's why I like probability. And I like probability as an expression of your belief in something. I mean, in the book, I say uncertainty. I like the definition. It's a conscious awareness of ignorance. It's all to do with our relationship with the world, what we don't know about the world. It's very personal, our uncertainty. And probability, I believe, is a very personal expression as a measure of our belief in any claim that's being made. And, in the book, I give a quiz to try to get people to think about the fact that they can. Maybe they're 80% confident. And these are just facts that you could look up on, Wikipedia in seconds if you cheated. But you don't know. And so, I'd ask things like, because it's for the UK readers for a start. I mean, who's older, the Prince of Wales or the Princess of Wales? Well, you could look that up in a moment, but people don't know on the whole. And then they think, oh, they try to second guess what I'm doing. And I ask them to give a probability on a scale, which one they think is most likely. And then to say between 5 and 10, 5 is 50-50, but 10 is they're absolutely confident. And then they get a score, which is a very nicely designed scoring rule that really penalizes people who are too cocky, too overconfident. So if you say 10 out of 10 and you're right, you get 25. If you say 10 out of 10 and you're wrong, you lose 75. And that is, those sorts of exercises can be used to train people to be in the middle, not to be give absolute confidence about anything, or not to shrug their shoulders and say they just don't know. People do know something all the time, and trying to extract that is a very important issue. I mean, the intelligence analysts, the ones who've studied it the most in the UK, US, everywhere, have all got their scales of uncertainty. For example, in the UK, if you're in the intelligence services and you use the word likely, you've got to mean between 55% and 75% probability. So there's an agreement about what the word likely means. And there's similar scales within NATO and other intelligence services. So, and that is really important so that people can do this fairly fine grading in terms of their uncertainty. And of course, the really brilliant people at this are people in super forecasting competitions who can really fine tune. Some of these people can tell the difference between 67% confidence and 69% confidence. And because the people who win these super forecasting competitions have the people like Philip Tetlock who've investigated this have shown that they've got particular personality that what they call foxes that can think of many things. They're very agile minds. They can change their minds quickly. They deliberately go out to find evidence that might upset their beliefs in order to they try to fight any confirmation bias they've got. These are extraordinary people with very self-critical analytic minds, and they can do fine gradations of belief. So I think people can do it. Some are better than others. Some people just seem to be appalling, just overconfident. They have to say 10 out of 10 for everything. And these are not people you want as your financial advisors or in government for that matter.
In the past, you have said that probability does not exist. And much as I'd love to go back and confront my old statistics professor with those words, I have a feeling you have something more subtle in mind. What do you mean by the idea that probability does not exist?
Yeah, that's quite a strong perspective, but I've held it for 50 years since I was about 20. I was introduced to this idea that probability, which was very late in arriving in the world, I mean, until the 1650s really, and I believe it's because we had to invent the idea. I mean, you can't see probability, you can't measure it. It's not like temperature or time or weight or distance or any of these things. We made it up. There's no probabilityometer that can measure things. I mean, people have tried to construct definitions of probability that are objective, that are properties of the world, but they're pretty strange. Strange. You have to think of infinite hypothetical, infinite repeats of the same situation. Well, we're talking about some probability of someone winning the election. What are we talking about? Some multiverse in which the election happens, every possible result of the election. You really have to strain your imagination to get some objective idea of what that probability is. And so I believe, and it's quite a strong view, that, pretty well, all the probabilities we talk about aren't actually out there in the world. They're a measure of our personal ignorance about either what's going on at the moment or what's happened or what will happen in the future. And it's quite slightly better. And rather than trying to estimate a true probability, we're in fact constructing a probability from our judgment and our knowledge and our experience and data. And those probabilities, of course, have to be then put to the test. We have to be continually checking how adequate they are, by using something like the scoring rule I described. And I think with that, and people have, I'm not the first one to claim this at all. I stole all the ideas from other people. And but people have worked for ages showing, that is a very practical way of thinking about it. Technically, it's a subjectivist Bayesian perspective. So, it's all to do with probabilities of personal expression of belief. It fits very nicely into Bayesian thinking, Bayesian analysis. I've worked my whole career doing Bayesian statistics, but you don't need to have that sort of technical perspective on it. I think you can just think of it as that uncertainty is our own ignorance, and probability is a measure of our own ignorance, and that's it, except at a subatomic level. Now, quantum is totally different. At quantum level, it's completely different. The only thing that exists is probability. If we go fine enough in, there's nothing there at all, except when we actually make some observation which might fix an electron, or we see an electron changing its position. In between, it's not there. It's just the only thing that exists is a probability distribution. So it's this bizarre thing that at that subatomic level, probability is the only thing that exists. But as soon as we get into our, the everyday level, which the quantum stuff doesn't really affect, then actually I don't think probability is there at all.
It's always been fascinating to me, because I wonder if part of the reason why we struggle to understand quantum mechanics is that we actually struggle with probability as a notion. Certainly I do, as we've established. One of the expressions I've heard you use on a number of occasions, and I've always really enjoyed, was that we imbue numbers with meaning.
I stole that from Nate Silver.
Yes, but a great person to steal from. But I'm wondering, I work in financial services. There is a lot of imbuing numbers with meaning in financial services. Have you ever looked at or thought about number abuse in finance? Maybe just reading the financial pages.
No, I keep well away from that. I've worked in health statistics all my life. That's what I do know something about. I absolutely keep well away from financial stuff. I don't understand it. I'm not that interested in it, to be honest. And the models that are used are a mystery to me. But I still think that maybe the things I say in books about modeling is very relevant, because it's this idea of, this classic cliche, really, that all models are wrong and some are useful. And we have to have a humility about all this nice mathematics, which is, it's the map, not the territory. It's complete artificial construction. It's not reality at all. And so we really need to be humble about it. And so it may work in some circumstances, and then it may stop working when those circumstances change, as we saw in the financial crash, where you could say that the financial models, failed dismally to allow for mass correlated behavior. And so I think that the idea of having a humility about mathematical constructions of reality goes through absolutely everything, whatever we're talking about. But in some areas, it's more important than others.
The idea of humility is fascinating. Humility, I suppose, about our own ignorance, right? Is that another way of thinking about uncertainty? Uncertainty in the sense of we're being a little humble about what we actually know and what we don't know.
Yeah, I think it comes in at two levels, I think, in that you need some humility in order just to say you're not certain. But then you also need some humility about your ability to express your uncertainty. And this comes down to the idea that people feel so happy about some probabilities rather than others. So if I've got a coin and I really looked at it and examined it and played with it a bit, then I'm going to be pretty confident in stating, yeah, my probability this is going to come up heads is a half. But if some shifty character gives me a coin, I'm going to be I might say a half because it's got no reason to think any one way or another, but I'm very unhappy about it, particularly because I know I go around with a two-headed coin all the time, just to annoy people and use it regularly in playing with audiences. So I don't trust anybody, and this is exactly the same in intelligence services, that people might be able to give a probability for something, but sometimes they feel very unhappy about giving a probability usually because there's some vital bit of information that could dramatically change their minds. That sort of sensitivity to new information makes people very unhappy and unwilling to express a judgment, a very concrete judgment. And so that's why in the book, I spent quite a lot of time introducing or discussing this idea of confidence in an assessment, which area after area has come up with. In medicine, there's, people do talk about, uncertainty about how the benefit of a drug, but then express a confidence in their analysis, a sort of star rating on their analysis, depending on the quality of evidence that's underlying what they're doing. When we did a big study, I spent a year on our infected blood inquiry, looking at how many people in the country had been infected and died with hepatitis C and HIV because of having infected blood products, up to 1970 and 1991. And we did an analysis, but sometimes some of it we were really confident about our analysis. Some of it, for HIV, for example, for hepatitis C, we were moderate. We did all the calculations, produced all the intervals and estimates, and then said, yeah, well, we've only got moderate confidence in this whole analysis. And for hepatitis B, we refused to answer the question. They said, how many people got infected with hepatitis B? Sorry, the evidence is so bad, we are not going to even try to answer that question. Our uncertainty is so great. Our lack of confidence in our analysis is so great. And similarly, in climate modeling, people will, make a probabilistic statement, but also give a confidence about it. Say, well, we're rather confident in this analysis. I don't know if this is done with financial models, but I don't see why not, because we've always got more confidence in some models than others. If you look at insurance, if you've got a life insurance model or a car insurance model, you can be pretty sure of what's going on. It's not going to be suddenly dramatic change. You can quote your premiums and your risks really quite well. You've got a good amount of data and so on. But if you're insuring against, I don't know, some really catastrophic risks or very rare risks, things that haven't even happened yet, well, you're sticking your finger in the air to some extent, and you won't have such confidence in your catastrophe models or anything like that. These are going to be low confidence models, and and similarly in financial areas, I'm sure there must be more confidence about some models than others, and I think this should be part of the discourse of modeling, rather than just talking about model risk and the possibility of models being wrong. Well, no, you can actually communicate to people that some models are better than others.
One of the things I found very interesting in the book is you talk about AI, which is this fascinating example of a technology that doesn't actually, you're actually pretty sympathetic, I think, to AI and the capabilities of AI. But as a technology, it expresses things with perfect confidence without uncertainty. And sometimes it just simply is making stuff up. So I wonder, is something you draw out in the book, what is the relationship between AI and bullshit?
Yeah. That's officially, a lot of AI is bullshit, using the bullshit in the technical term. The technical term for bullshit is when it's having a disregard for the truth. So a bullshitter, a liar, actually has great respect for the truth because he's deliberately not telling it. Whereas a bullshitter actually has no idea whether things true or false. Everything's just delivered with complete confidence. So large language models can be bullshitters because everything's delivered with complete confidence. And at the bottom, you see this little thing, some of the things I say are wrong, or, I sometimes have hallucinations or something like that. I mean, it's not good enough, to be honest. And I say this as someone who 40 years ago was working on uncertainty in AI. The first uncertainty in AI conferences, I think the first one was in 1986. I contributed to the first two of those. It was an active topic in the mid 1980s, how to get sort of probability into AI. And we thought we'd got it kind of sorted. How wrong could we be? Because we were working, of course, in laughably tiny, bits of models, of course. Now, with these massive and unbelievably impressive large language models, which I used in writing the book, I'm completely open about that, both in doing the coding and for, exploring arguments and so on and etc. It's incredibly useful. So in a way, we've gone backwards, but actually the AI is so fantastic. And, I say that in the book but I would love that when a large language model is making a concrete claim, it could at least give some idea of sort of star rating in terms of its confidence it has got in that claim, in terms of, which it should be able to do in terms of, are there multiple sources this has come from? It's exploring this, billions of nodes in this network, but, it should be able to do it. And because people are trying to do that, it's an active area of research. I think that in a few years that, things will be working much more like that. So especially in rather what you might call mission critical uses, where it actually is important that it gets it right, it should be able to say how confident it is. Because I've worked for ages you could call it AI. It operates as AI, for example, systems that for a man with prostate cancer, like I've got, or a woman with breast cancer, you put in your symptoms and all sorts of stuff, and it'll give you a probability of surviving 10 years and how a different, or 15 years, whatever, and then how that is affected by having different treatments. Now, it operates as AI because it sits there in the corner while people are discussing this, and it comes up with an opinion, and that's an expert in the room for everybody. It doesn't have to be, which is used as a very skilled and reliable opinion. There's always extra facts that it hasn't taken into account that the doctors will have, but it operates as AI. It's not called AI because it's using a statistical regression analysis, which is the sort of thing I'm familiar with. I kind of wish we had called it AI. We might have got more funding for it, but operationally, it's like AI, but it can give a probability. It always just outputs probabilities, and those probabilities are reliable. When it says 70%, chance of surviving, 10 years, of people for which it says that 70% will survive 10 years. So its probability claims are trustworthy.
Let's pivot a bit. David, I have always thought of myself as a very lucky person. It's just my feeling about my life. Now, in the book, you actually break luck into sort of three components, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the three parts of luck.
Yeah, I love the idea of luck. And first of all, I should say, I don't think of luck as some external force that, that operates in the world and affects you or something like that. It's a purely sort of retrospective label on when things happen to go well or badly for you. And the sort of deconstruction of luck, I've again stolen completely from moral philosophers who've looked at this, largely looking at sort of culpability of people for what happens. And I should say the first type of luck, the most basic and the most important, is absolutely vital, and that's what they call constitutive luck, which is just who you were born as. Who your parents were, how did you come into the world? What was the country? What was the time in history? Who your parents were, what your genes were, what your environment was, and so on. Things over which you had zero control. You did not ask to come into the world. Just there you were, from some amazingly fragile system, set of circumstances which might so easily not have happened, as I mentioned in the book, and so. But yet that is enormously important. I know who I was born and when I was born has had a massive influence in my life. I'd love to think that any successes I've had were always just due to my, more my hard work and that sort of thing. Well, yeah, a bit of them were, but I've got to admit I had everything going for me, and not money. My parents didn't have any money. That they didn't have that element of privilege. Is more time of history. The fact that I could get a free and really good education. I went to university. There were no fees. When I came out, I could almost choose which job I wanted, et cetera, et cetera. I could, end up with a really good pension. This is just time and place in history. which was the norms, and benefit from increasing house prices, or they end up with stonks of money just because of living in a house. So, it's absurd. And, we're the generation that ate all the pies, but I was just part of that generation. And so that's my constitutive luck of being born. And of course, many people have terrible constitutive luck. If you think of places in the world you would not now want to be born into. Next one, though. Next one is circumstantial luck. Being at the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time. So I use an example. My grandfather, who had the bad constitutive luck to be born just in time to go into the First World War, and he had terrible circumstantial luck. He ended up as brigade gas officer in one of the worst bits of the Western Front in early 1918, with a job which must have had a minimal life expectancy. And he lasted 3 weeks in the job before a German shell came over and got him and blew him up. Wrong place at the wrong time. However, what he did have was the third type of luck, which is really good outcome luck, or sometimes called resultant luck, because that particular, by microscopic circumstances, that shell was just far enough away. So although he was blown up, he wasn't killed. And so he was taken back behind the lines. He was declared B2, so he got him off frontline duties. And I think almost certainly it changed his life, because his battalion then went to a terrible bit of the line, and he would have had to lead counterattacks. And, he was a junior officer. He'd have had to be first up the trench, up a ladder, blowing his whistle, getting his men to follow him. I wouldn't be here.
I related to that story so much when I read it in the book, because my own grandfather fought in the First World War, U.S. Army Air Corps. And
God, that's dangerous.
I've got a fabulous picture of him standing beside a plane that he had crashed. And he walked with a limp. He walked with a cane for his entire life from this plane crash. But on the one hand, crash your plane, terrible luck. On the other hand, he lived. So great luck. Amazing.
And
luck.
You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here to tell the story.
I would not be here, not at all.
That's an amazing story, because that really is dangerous area to be in. Yeah.
Let's talk about red teams. Let's talk about the idea of red teams. What do red teams do? What purpose would they serve in any organization?
Yeah, I think the people who really push red teams in the UK are very much are the Ministry of Defence. They're really keen to not sink into groupthink, everyone agreeing with each other, a single point of view. They want to have that sort of, well, we mentioned it before, as a sort of fox-like thinking that good super forecasters have, which is to not do stuck into confirmation bias, to seek critical viewpoints that can disrupt your thinking. So a red team are a disruptive team. They're supposed to be criticizing the mainstream thought. I mean, they can be a real pain in the arse, of course, because they're being negative. They're saying what can go wrong. They're coming up with alternative perspectives. And they can be there as actual teams. The Ministry of Defence proposes kind of red team mindset, which is you don't need to have perhaps a specific red team, but just within any group discussion or something, to try to establish that self-criticality, that reflexivity that stops you going into a particular way of thinking. It's interesting. I mean, I use an example in the book of President Obama faced with the raid on Abbottabad, whether Osama bin Laden was actually in the compound or not. And they had multiple independent teams doing essentially the risk assessment, assessing the probabilities, which I thought is a really clever thing to do. And he had some sort of gung-ho people. I think the highest went to about 70, 80% probability, belief that he was in there. Another miserable team said, there's only about 30% chance he's there. Well, real red team, one's all looking at the bad. Great. And he got all those opinions. In the end, he said, I think it was about 50-50. And he went for it, and he was right. And people have argued since then whether the team should have got together and just presented a single view to him. And I think that's completely wrong. I think it's actually good that he hears the diversity of opinion. So I thought that was actually a rather good example of having multiple teams. Without even just thinking about the red teams, having multiple independent teams of modelers, I think is incredibly valuable. During the COVID pandemic, this magic R number, which everybody was interested in, how many people on average someone would infect. There are 8 teams in the UK with 14 different models, all trying to estimate this. All they're trying to estimate the same quantity from actually quite similar data and getting very different answers because they all had different approaches. Answers sort of, which the intervals didn't even overlap a lot of the time. So, but they all got together and argued about it and came up with a consensus viewpoint, which was then published. But what I thought was really brave of them, which I used in the book, is they also published their individual estimates again. So you can see the variation in opinion. And I think if I'm, would be consulting experts, I would be interested just as much in the variety of opinion than just, some single claim of uncertainty, which is almost certain to be too narrow because all models are wrong. So any uncertainty that comes from any model is always too narrow, always. So I think that's the real value of having multiple independent teams, including some miserable buggers who to give a diversity of viewpoints.
It seems to me that diversity of viewpoints for anyone trying to make any decision, or even for an independent citizen trying to evaluate things in their own political system or their own life, allows them to understand the nature of uncertainty and really understand that certainty to an extent is an illusion.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, as I said, if you've just got one team and one model, you're completely reliant on that construction, that way of thinking about things. And it's wrong, it's limited. So this is, I think, potentially very misleading indeed. So I think you should have multiple teams who don't even speak to each other. I mean, one of the things, for climate, there are multiple independent climate teams around the world. I kind of feel they shouldn't speak to each other before they finally put their data in together. Otherwise, these are not independent opinions.
The book, once again, is The Art of Uncertainty: How to Navigate Chance, Ignorance, Risk, and Luck by David Spiegelhalter. You may feel like me, that it is worth a trip to London to buy it now. Otherwise, it will be coming out from Norton in March of next year. So you can pre-order it from Norton, or you can pre-order it on Amazon right now. David, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It was such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to rant on.
The Essential Podcast is produced by Patrick Moroney. At S&P Global, we accelerate progress in the world by providing intelligence that is essential for companies, governments, and individuals to make decisions with conviction. From the majestic heights of 55 Water Street in Manhattan, I am Nathan Hunt. Thank you for listening.